Yeah, so I really enjoyed your film. I thought it was really just like really interesting, and it was great at the Q&A afterwards. So um,
Mhm.
it'll just be good to kind of get a little bit of a general sense of what the film's about, and just have a couple of questions for you. Great, yeah. So I suppose to start off, if you could just introduce a little bit about your film, what's it called and what's it about?
So the film is called The Welfare of Tomás Hallissy. Main subject of the film is boy Tomás, who's basically the ideas of the film is that he's caught between these two perspectives of the community, the sort of society that he's from in Kerry, and the perspective of two American anthropologists who come to study the village, in particular to study what they perceive as a epidemic of mental illness that's occurring at the time.
I understand that the film is somewhat of a hybrid of archive documentary footage and original footage that you've created yourself. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean the starting point for me for the film was a film that was made in 1968 called The Village, which is about Dunquin on the Dingle Peninsula, made by Paul Hawkins and Mark McCarthy, and it's basically a kind of portrayal of day-to-day life, so kind of work practices. It does take into account the sort of arrival of the very early stages of kind of tourist industry. There's English tourists who are visiting the area at the time. So when I saw that initially, I was talking to a friend who works at UCD, and he suggested that I read a book by another American anthropologist, Nancy Shepherd Hughes, called Saints, Scholars and Schizophrenics, which is it took place on the Dingle Peninsula a few years after that, and it was more an attempt really to kind of get under the skin of the place to understand the why there was such a high incidence of people being hospitalised for various mental illness, schizophrenia in particular. So, and then I did kind of expand it. So there are other studies. I think those are the two kind of the two main reference points: the Village and Nancy Shepherd Hughes' book Saint Scholars and Schizophrenics. And so in the final film, there are I've used some of the footage from the Village. So we got a print from the Irish Film Archive, and kind of restored some of it, or the sections that we used. We rescanned the whole thing, but like paid particular attention to the stuff that made it into the film, and then the whole aesthetic of the film, even the stuff that I shot myself, was kind of based on that. We tried to match the cinematographer Rena Yang. Kind of went to great lengths to sort of match the workflow of how the Village was shot, so, and to kind of replicate the grain structure and the way the sort of situation. So like the cameras on the shoulder quite a lot, for example, and very similar kind of simple setups. So that kind of the referencing extends to that as well.
Absolutely, and I think you definitely really achieved a lot of those the similar grain structures and shooting styles. At times, I was sitting there going, "Is that from the original film or is that new stuff?" So I think you really succeeded there. Like, I mean, so I think someone coming into it with fresh eyes wouldn't, or without knowing, that it is a mixture of the two different, things that were shot. What is it, 40 something years apart? Like, so it's a hell of an achievement there.
I mean, it was because it all sort of came together at the end, but there were certain points where I was wondering about that, if that. But seeing it all like at the end, I think it is. It was kind of worthwhile, like going to the ends that we did with archival material in particular, because as soon as you see it, it just sort of reveals there's a whole lot more depth, for example, to the image, and so it was a very pleasing moment, like seeing them kind of come to life again, I suppose.
So could you take me through just a little bit of the process from when IMMA contacted you about making this film and to when the idea kind of came together for you?
I mean, I basically, it was a little bit stop-start in terms of the commission itself, because I did a show at IMMA in 2014, and when we were planning, like there was over a year kind of preamble to that show. Plan was that I was going to make something new for the show, as well as showing films that I'd already made. So there was 4 films in the end, but one of them was going to be new. But just for a variety of reasons, and it was mainly to do with like my other commitments at the time, I kind of realised, like, as soon as we got into, well, first of all, that there was a lot of work to do to use the space in IMMA to kind of design it in a way that would be like, it'd just be sort of sympathetic and generous to people who are coming, and give them the best opportunity to, if they want to, kind of sit and watch all the films from beginning to end. And then in terms of the other commitments I had at the time, I kind of realised that I wasn't really going to be able to manage it all. So Sarah Glennie, the director of IMMA, she very kindly held over the opportunity. So the show happened, and then basically there was another kind of strand of commissioning that which was to do with the year commemoration for 1916-2016. So basically, she offered to extend the prospect of making a new film again, which is great for me. I mean, it doesn't often happen actually in these situations. I mean, usually when you've shown somewhere, that's it, or you might show like years after. So it's quite an unusual position to be in, to be asked back again so soon. So that basically got the ball rolling again on the film. I mean, at that stage, it's funny the way these things work out, because at that stage I'd seen The Village, I'd kind of read a certain amount, but it almost kind of got mothballed in a way. But in another way, it's still kind of there in your head, and you're still thinking about it and making connections. So I think had I made it like the first time around, it would have been a very different thing. But it had a much longer germination. And so, for example, I got to spend a lot longer down in Kerry, out at Dunquin or Dingle, around the Dingle Peninsula, which was sort of invaluable, just because it's as much as the research was just kind of talking to people, kind of getting the way people talk and sort of turns of phrase that they have, and so that kind of became part of the process. And I think it allowed me to read kind of wider around that, so there was a lot more research that I managed to do, which didn't necessarily make it in, but it was really good to have a sense of that context as well. And then in terms of like the planning, like the crew that we got together for it, and thinking about different actors, for example. So I think in the end it was a kind of a virtue, the fact that it didn't happen when it was supposed to happen originally, that there was that kind of lag, and it got picked up again.
I understand that there is a strong theme of mental health running through this film. Was that something that you originally set out to explore in the film, or and as well as that, how do you decide what topic or theme you're going to explore in your next films?
The first thing to say is that there's no doubt that it was a kind of fact of life, at that time. And then I think the kind of context for me really was was the sort of anthropological studies that either kind of stated the issues or in some cases then tried to kind of delve into that and understand, like to kind of diagnose it in a way, like what was it about what was happening in these communities or in these societies that brought this about. And I think in terms of, I think one of the things that really interested me about that was because of the kind of difficulties with, I think it was something that was there was a lot of sense of taboo about any issues to do with mental health. So say for example with Nancy Shepherd Hughes, when she kind of got down to like trying to talk to people about it, you know, they're quite reticent and quite conservative in how they'll kind of try to articulate it themselves. So she devised a number of strategies to try and kind of get around that. And one of the things that I found very interesting about her approach was that she became very interested in local folklore and mythology as a way of almost understanding the subconscious of particular society, of that kind of society, so you could kind of understand the limits of, you know, what's acceptable and what's not. So I found that approach very interesting. And I think, like, even beyond that, I think one of the things that I found, I don't think my film really resolves it in any particular way, but I just found quite an interesting energy was the that kind of tension between what the anthropologists wanted to do and what people were willing to give them in terms of information or whatever to kind of form the representations that they did. And you know, in some ways, in a lot of ways, there was quite a lot of antagonism, quite a lot of misconstrual of like what they were doing there, and I found that quite interesting. And you know, like I said, I think it is kind of unresolved. Sorry, there was another part to your question which I've forgotten about.
Yeah, so how do you decide on what themes or topics you want to explore for your films? Is it something that you start off with, or is it something you more discover along the way?
I think it does. I have an idea to start off with, but I think it is a kind of process of me finding out along the way as well. So, for example, with this, it did change a lot from what I thought it would be to begin with, and then you know when you kind of arrive, like at each kind of turn, it does sort of change because you know I don't start out from a position of or maybe end up being in a particular position expertise in any way. So it is kind of it's as much part of the process as me finding out about these things. And I mean, I think with this film, it's also true for pretty much every film that I've made, that I'm not trying to be particularly kind of comprehensive or conclusive about whatever the subject matter might be. I think it's quite important to kind of leave it open.
When do those kind of points happen for you in the process? Because obviously you have your huge amount of research process when you're watching all of this like archive footage and the documentary, you're writing, you're shooting, you're editing. Like, were there any kind of specific standout moments where it kind of hit you like, oh, this is the film I'm making, this is what it's all about? Or like you say, you kind of leave it kind of open?
I mean, I think obviously the first one was like watching The Village. I think the thing that I was really taken about The Village was, or the thing that stuck with me after seeing it the first time was the guy who ran the local bar, Kruger, and it was a really unexpected thing to see in a film like that. That you know, you had somebody who I think he sort of encapsulated that kind of antagonism, because he was very suspicious about Paul Hawkins and Mark McCarthy with what they were doing there, and I've read about it since, you know, the kind of like their take on it, and according to them, they sort of explained what they were doing there, but he still didn't believe them, and he tried to get the local priest involved in having the whole thing shut down, but that backfired as well. But it's real kind of comedy, actually, like when you see him, the way he pops up in the film, and I think that's kind of what stuck with me. You know, I think if it hadn't have been for him, you know, I wouldn't have talked about it to other people, and then, you know, had the suggestions. And then I think the other big thing was, it was that combined with the suggestion to read Nancy Shepherd Hughes' book. And I think once I got the two of those things together, I realised, you know, that was the point that I kind of knew that there's really something here. I still wasn't quite clear what, but I knew that there was definitely a lot of material here that, you know, I could really kind of get into this. So those are probably the two kind of really key moments.
So obviously, you know, this film, it's not your conventional narrative structure or your conventional commercial type of film. You might call it an experimental film or an art film, I suppose. But I suppose my question is, why tell the story in this way as opposed to a straight dramatic film or a straight documentary?
It's a good question. I mean, I wasn't particularly pitching it, and, you know, like, this is how I want to approach it. It just kind of evolved that way, I would say. I mean, also, I think probably in relation to some other films I've made, it's probably, you know, in terms of as a piece of storytelling, it's much more conventional. It feels to me, anyway, in relation to other films that I've made. But I mean, that's a little bit like, it's a difficult one for me to answer, because, you know, I think there's like, for example, other films I've made, they say that use a lot of archival material. I mean, even though obviously they are in kind of reference to particular social or political situations, for example, but I think archives are kind of in and of themselves sort of incomplete, and at a certain point it does have to become like a response to the material. And actually the whole kind of editing process, the sort of rhythm that kicks in then sort of has its say as well. But sorry, I'm not answering your question very well, but that's kind of approximately.
That's okay. Yeah, like, I mean, I suppose I'm thinking of it more from an element of and I think you have actually answered it quite well, because I have seen I've seen two of your other films before. I've seen was it Bernadette, and the film about the DeLorean factory, and I love this film, and I love those other two films as well. So I understand what you're saying about the more kind of straight narrative on the other ones. But I suppose what I'm kind of getting at is like trying to get an insight into your process of expressing yourself through this way. So one filmmaker might, you know, hear the story about Tomás and this village and say, I'm going to tell it by just making a straight short film. Or someone might say, I'm going to make a documentary about it. But Duncan Campbell says, I'm going to make it with you know, archive footage and my own twist on it, and I'm going to leave it kind of open. So I suppose that's kind of what I'm getting at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably, like, at the end of the day, I'm probably interested in different kind of perspectives on one thing, you know, and that's maybe what kind of maybe removes it from being one person's point of view on, which might be a more kind of traditional narrative approach to doing it. But because, you know, I think there are, like, so for example, like with this film, I mean, it is you know, the main character in it doesn't say anything in the film, and it is about him, but it's about, like, all the kind of influences that are, because he's still at a very formative stage, but it's all the kind of influences that are kind of brought to bear on him in one way or another. So, but yeah, I think it probably is a question of trying to have something that has a number of different perspectives. And I'm also I'm not particularly interested in sort of mediating or coming down on the side of one. This is the right perspective or wrong, because. So, for example, if you look at the anthropologist perspective in this, there is a very problematic, and if you're dealing with people who feel that they've been misrepresented, it's a very kind of thorny situation. But at the same time, I do think with Nancy Shepherd Hughes, I think I think it's a very valuable study that she's produced, nevertheless. And I think it's kind of paradoxical in a way.
So one of the things that struck me at the screening was, there was a Q&A afterwards, and there was a lot of people asking questions, and a lot of people were having pretty profound and interesting reactions to your film. And the way, I suppose, since it is kind of open at the end, everyone can take different things from it. What's it like seeing audiences react to your film in different ways?
I learn a lot actually from, I'm not I'm really not some kind of megalomaniac in terms of my intention is the only thing going, because I think, like I was saying before, part of the process, part of the working process for me is about finding out things myself as I go along. By no means an expert on these things, and I think what the kind of perspectives that other people bring to bear on not this film but any other film that I've made, I've learned an incredible amount from that. So I think for me it's really important.
And what's next for the film?
It's shown. The original. There was the original three partners were IMMA. Van Abbe is a museum in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, and so they both shown the work as it's kind of installed at IMMA. So it's kind of you can go in over a period of time and it's on all day. So there's one more. There's a place in Vancouver called the Western Front. So it's been shown there in May. There's also been a good deal of interest from film festivals. So it's been shown at Indie Lisboa, which is in May as well, and Kerry Film Festival. So it's kind of going home in a way, and London Film Festival so far. So, I'm sure it probably will show elsewhere, but that's, at least off the top of my head, that's the programme so far.
That's fantastic. I'd say it'll do great in all those places, but particularly in Kerry, as you say, it's going home. Because even because I remember at the screening the other night there was people saying that they had grown up in the area, that they had family who grew up, and they felt it was true to the place and the people and all that. But yeah, listen, it was great talking to you, and thanks, Mel, for taking the time to talk to us at Film Ireland. So
yeah, no problem. No, it was good to talk to you too.
Yeah, and best of luck with the film, and I look forward to seeing the next one.
Thanks, Conor.
Thanks, Mel.